Two sisters, one crown, one lifetime spent in the shadows. When Princess Elizabeth became heir to the British throne at just 10 years old, her younger sister Margaret's destiny changed forever. From that moment on, one sister was being prepared to rule a kingdom, while the other struggled to find her place in a world where she could never be queen. Their story wasn't just about royalty. It was a story of love, rivalry, sacrifice, heartbreak, and a bond that survived decades of pressure. And in many ways, Princess Margaret paid a hidden price for a crown she would never wear. When people think about the British royal family, they usually focus on the monarch. But behind every heir is a spare. The sibling who grows up beside the future king or queen while knowing the throne will never be theirs. Few royal relationships illustrate this better than the extraordinary bond between Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret. They were sisters, confidantes, rivals, and lifelong companions. Yet the same event that made Elizabeth Britain's future queen left Margaret searching for purpose for the rest of her life. Today, we're exploring the fascinating story of two royal sisters whose lives were forever shaped by duty, destiny, and the weight of the crown. Let's get into it. The day everything changed. The defining moment in Elizabeth and Margaret's lives happened in 1936. At the time, Princess Elizabeth was 10 years old and Princess Margaret was just 6. Neither was expected to play a major role in British history. Then came a constitutional crisis. Their uncle, King Edward VIII, chose love over duty. Determined to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson, he abdicated the throne, creating one of the greatest royal scandals of the 20th century. Suddenly, everything changed. Edward's younger brother became King George VI, and his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, became the future queen. According to royal accounts, Elizabeth explained the news to Margaret herself. Uncle David is going away, and Papa is to be king. Margaret then asked the question that would define the rest of their lives. Does that mean you're going to be queen? Elizabeth simply replied, yes, one day. For Elizabeth, it meant responsibility. For Margaret, it meant realizing that her sister's future would always be different from her own. And from that moment onward, the distinction between heir and spare became impossible to ignore. Two sisters, two very different paths. Although they grew up in the same household, Elizabeth and Margaret were treated differently almost immediately. King George VI knew Elizabeth would eventually become monarch. As a result, her education became far more extensive. She received specialized lessons in history, constitutional law, government, and the Church of England. Tutors from prestigious institutions helped prepare her for future leadership. Margaret received none of that. Instead, she was given a more traditional education focused on music, arts, and social accomplishments. What made this especially painful was that many believed Margaret was naturally brighter academically than her sister. Years later, Margaret reportedly admitted that the unequal education had always bothered her. She felt she could have achieved much more had she been given the same opportunities. While Elizabeth was being trained for a destiny she never chose, Margaret was being told that such preparation simply wasn't necessary. It was one of the earliest signs that royal life would never be equal for the two sisters, their father's favorite girls. Despite the differences, King George VI adored both daughters. The royal family often referred to themselves as us four, the king, the queen, Elizabeth, and Margaret. They were remarkably close. But their father had a special soft spot for Margaret. He famously said, "Elizabeth is my pride. Margaret is my joy." Elizabeth carried the burden of expectations. Margaret received affection and indulgence. If Elizabeth represented duty, Margaret represented fun. She was lively, charismatic, witty, and often the center of attention. Yet beneath the warmth of family life, sibling rivalry occasionally surfaced. The sisters fought, argued, and competed just like any other children. Margaret reportedly wanted whatever Elizabeth had. Elizabeth occasionally complained that her younger sister always wanted the same thing she did. They were royal princesses, but they were also simply sisters. And nowhere would that bond be tested more than during World War II. Wartime sisters. When World War II erupted, Britain faced one of its darkest periods. German bombs fell across London. Thousands of children were evacuated from dangerous areas. Elizabeth and Margaret were sent to Windsor Castle for safety, where they spent much of the war years. Separated from their parents for long stretches, the sisters relied heavily on each other. They staged plays, performed in pantomimes, and created entertainment for themselves during a frightening time. This period revealed one of Margaret's greatest strengths. She loved performing. She thrived in front of an audience. While Elizabeth was naturally reserved, Margaret seemed born for the spotlight. In 1940, 14-year-old Elizabeth delivered a famous radio address to children evacuated during the war. But at the end of the speech, she invited Margaret to join her. "Come on, Margaret." Together they wished children across the Commonwealth good night. It was a small gesture, but it reflected something important. Even as Elizabeth's public role grew, she still wanted her younger sister beside her. Love changes everything. After the war, another major shift occurred. Elizabeth fell deeply in love with Prince Philip. They married in 1947. For the first time, Margaret was no longer the most important person in her sister's life. Elizabeth now had a husband. Soon she would have children. Margaret suddenly found herself standing further from the center of her sister's world. Then came an even greater tragedy. In February 1952, King George VI died unexpectedly. Elizabeth was only 25 years old. Overnight, she became queen. Margaret lost more than a father. She lost the person who had adored her most. And she lost the sister she had always known. As queen, Elizabeth's responsibilities became overwhelming. The intimate relationship they once shared could never be exactly the same again. Margaret later suggested that the coronation in 1953 felt like the moment she truly lost her sister, the love she couldn't have. If there is one chapter that defines Princess Margaret's life, it is her romance with Group Captain Peter Townsend. Townsend was older, experienced, and divorced. Margaret loved him deeply. But there was a problem. At that time, the Church of England opposed remarriage after divorce when a former spouse was still living. And Queen Elizabeth, as head of the church, was trapped between family loyalty and constitutional duty. The situation echoed the very scandal that had changed their lives years earlier, the abdication of Edward I. Public fascination became intense. Would Margaret choose love or duty? After years of speculation, she made her decision. Margaret announced that she would not marry Townsend. She explained that she was placing her duty to the Commonwealth above her personal desires. It was one of the most heartbreaking moments of her life, and many observers believe it left emotional scars that never fully healed. A glamorous princess in search of happiness. Eventually, Margaret found love again. She married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones in 1960. The wedding captivated the world. Modern, glamorous, exciting. Unlike many royal marriages before it, this one felt fresh and contemporary. Together, they became one of the most photographed couples of their era. They had 2 children and enjoyed years of celebrity-style attention. But behind the glamorous image, problems emerged. Both partners were rumored to have affairs. Arguments increased. Distance grew. By the mid-1970s, the marriage was falling apart. In 1978, Margaret became the first senior British royal in centuries to divorce. It was another painful chapter in a life filled with difficult choices. Yet throughout it all, Elizabeth remained supportive. The Queen may not always have approved of her sister's decisions, but she never stopped loving her, the bond that never broke. As the years passed, the sisters became even more different. Elizabeth embodied discipline, stability, and service. Margaret embraced freedom, creativity, and spontaneity. One was admired for duty. The other was often criticized for rebellion. But beneath the public image was a relationship that endured. They reportedly spoke regularly, maintained a direct phone line between their homes, and remained deeply connected throughout their lives. During Queen Elizabeth's difficult years, including the royal family crises of the 1990s, Margaret remained a loyal source of support. She understood her sister better than almost anyone else. After all, they had lived through the same extraordinary history together. The final goodbye. Princess Margaret's health deteriorated during the late 1990s. Years of smoking and illness took a heavy toll. Multiple strokes left her frail and increasingly isolated. In February 2002, Margaret died at the age of 71. For Queen Elizabeth, it was a devastating loss. Just weeks later, the Queen Mother also passed away. Within 2 months, Elizabeth lost both her sister and her mother. Those closest to the Queen said she was deeply affected. Although she rarely displayed emotion publicly, witnesses saw tears in her eyes during Margaret's funeral. For a woman known for self-control, it spoke volumes. The sister who had shared her childhood, her secrets, her struggles, and her extraordinary journey was gone. The story of Elizabeth and Margaret reminds us that royal life is never as simple as it appears. One sister was destined to wear the crown. The other spent her life searching for where she belonged beside it. Yet, despite jealousy, heartbreak, duty, and decades of challenges, their bond endured until the very end. What do you think? Was Princess Margaret treated unfairly because she was the spare, or did she have freedoms that Elizabeth never could? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into royal history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the British royal family. And we'll see you in the next one.